Hey guys, tonight we drift into a quiet edge of the world, where clouds walk the ground and wind is a patient thread in human hands. Fog nets and wind threads is a sleepy journey through places that drink the sky. Coasts wrapped in sea mist, headlands with morning veils, ridges where the breeze is a slow loom. Settle in. We'll listen to the hush of mesh, the soft patter of captured droplets, and the unhurried craft of turning air into water. The night leaves the stones cool, and the ocean breath draws near. Along a slope where scrub clings to grit and pale lichen freckles the rock, a line of poles stands like a quiet procession. Between them, the nets. Not the screaming color of fishing lines, nor the heavy weave of sails, but a soft, forgiving mesh that answers to the lightest touch, waiting for what it cannot chase. Before sunrise, the air thickens, edges blur, and the nets become gray ghosts, held slightly taut, as if the morning were a fabric they might smooth. In that pearly hour, a small sound becomes a world. Drip, drip, drip. It is not rain. It's the patient assembly of 1,000 tiny meetings. Salt-rinsed breeze greeting cool filament. Vapor giving up its walk to become a bead becoming a drop remembering gravity. The mesh is simple but not careless. Thread crossing thread so that every wandering mote of water finds a resting place. Enough roughness to coax a bead into forming, enough openness to let the wind continue on, undefended, unbroken, unblamed. Nearby, a trench is lined with rounded stones like a string of quiet moons, leading to a clay jar sunk to its neck in the ground. The jar is dark, shy of sunlight, because water that comes from sky breath wants darkness to stay sweet. A thin channel guided by the slope does the rest. Every patient drop from the net learns the path, a tiny pilgrim traveling down, joining others in a soft chorus that no one but the early birds and the watchful keeper truly hears. So much here is learned by listening rather than forcing. The first builders watched crest lines and swales, how fog climbed one face and thinned on the other. They tried coarse rope, and it ran off like quicksilver. They tried hair-fine gauze, and the breeze pulled it into fretful knots. They measured morning with cracked mugs and finger widths, finding the hour when the air was thickest and the hour when the sun's warm hand unraveled what the night had woven. They learned to set the nets a little away from the ridge crest, where wind still carried fog but did not hammer it flat. They leaned into the land's grammar: rock, shrub, hollow, line. This is not a loud technology. It has no hurry. A child could carry a panel. A grandmother could tie its corners. An uncle could straighten a post with a foot on a stone and a thoughtful tilt of the head. Repairs are hushed. A new knot where a thread frayed, a stitch where a spar bent, a gentle tightening at the corner where the mesh sighed too much in a storm. And because it is quiet, the creatures stay. The small beetles sweeping the grit like slow boats. The ground birds stepping in soft 2s and 3s. The fox that pauses, ears pricked, listening to the cups and jars fill by breath alone. If you stand close, you discover that fog has texture. It is not the smooth emptiness the eye suggests. It is crowded with minute jewels looking for a place to rest. The net is generous with resting places, just rough enough to interrupt, just orderly enough to guide. In the gray light, each bead swells until weight persuades it to slip, trace the thread, meet another bead, and become something heavier, a decision. Droplets choose edges, edges choose lines, lines choose the waiting mouth of the trench. The jar, silent, becomes a small gravity in its own right, the end of many journeys. There are rituals to this work. At nightfall, the keepers walk the line, tapping posts with a stick, listening for the hollow ring that says the footing is sound.
They brush the mesh with a bundled palm of grass to shake out grit and loosen salt, then leave it to the night's chill. Before dawn, they return with cups and a little notebook with stains of old mornings. They do not count to boast, they count to learn. How the south wind gave more than the north wind. How a new planting of shrubs diffused the gusts so beads formed faster. How a hotter week asked for a wider mesh so drops did not cling and evaporate before they fell. The hills carry stories, years when almost no cloud walked the ground and the jars waited like patient teachers with no students. Other years when the sea breathed heavily and the trenches burbled and the goats seemed to blink in surprise at water arriving from no stream. Children race each other with the first cups of the morning, proud as if they had hauled it from a far spring. The elders chuckle and smooth hair, remembering that the first water is always for the plants, the pots, and the hands that weave. But the laughter is gentle because a child's joy in invisible rain is a lesson worth keeping. Far out, the sun lifts the line of the world. The nets fade from ghost to silver, and then to a modest presence, as if embarrassed to be seen. The breath thins, beads shrink, the drip slows. This is expected. The nets rest in daylight like sails furled in a calm. Work shifts to washing and mending, to trimming the slopes so the wind's fingers aren't snagged by new thorn, to smoothing stone channels with wet cloth so algae does not take hold. In a shed with a cool earthen floor, coils of replacement mesh wait, some fine as hair, some with a lattice you can see through like cross-hatched shade. Shelves keep jars of knots, different bindings for different winds, each with a story about what it solved. There is cleverness here, but it wears a woolen blanket and sits near the door. The craft is less about invention than attention. The net speaks to wind. Pass through me, but leave a little of your water behind. The wind answers, I have plenty. I never carry anything for long. And the fog, shy but bountiful, takes comfort in a place made exactly for its softness. A village learns to live on this conversation. Morning becomes a quiet festival. Basins filled, a thin stew given a cup to loosen it, clay bricks moistened for building, herbs rinsed without walking miles to a brackish spring. By noon, the silence changes timbre. In the distance, there might be a tower that gulps wind into its cool heart, a windcatcher, a cousin in the same family of aircraft. But that is for a later night. Today, we lie down in the shade of a stone, smell the faint mineral tang that rides in from the sea, and let the mind rest on the simple miracle that air has weight, and weight has water, and water has patience, and patience, kept well, becomes life in a jar.
By daylight, the nets rest, but the wind keeps working, old and tireless. It presses its palms against hills and courtyards, runs its fingers down alleyways, and ducks through wooden screens as if peeking into quiet rooms. In many dry cities, the wind has long been invited in like a respected guest, not with fanfare, but with architecture that knows how to listen. Look up, a tower rises, a simple shaft above a roofline, faced with open mouths toward whatever direction the breeze prefers. This is the windcatcher, the house's cool lung, a patient organ that neither beats nor burns, yet moves heat and water with nothing but difference. Warm against cool, high against low, dry against less dry. The tower appears plain from afar, but inside it is clever. Channels are divided by thin walls that steer air as a shepherd steers a flock. If the wind is generous, one face drinks it in, while the opposite face exhales the used-up breath back to the sky. If the day is still, the tower waits for a whisper of pressure, a child's worth, to set a slow current in motion. Air slides down the shaded throat of the tower, meets a tray of water, or a narrow cascade over carved stone called a salsabīl, and immediately the house remembers evening. The air gives up some heat to the cool surface, and in return it becomes heavier, more willing to sink. A draft begins, light, steady, almost moral in its consistency. Curtains lift, then settle. The doorstep cools by a degree you can feel in your knees. The potted basil stops looking weary. In a courtyard below, everything has been arranged for this conversation. The floor might be pebbled in a mosaic that never glitters too sharply. The walls lime-washed to reflect light without biting the eyes. The shade deep and soft rather than hard-edged. A narrow channel crosses the stones, not always with water in it, but ready, because when air cools, it can tolerate less of its invisible burden, and out of that burden come small mercies. On some days, a jug sweats lightly. On other days, the salsabīl's gentle surface roughness coaxes vapor into beads along its lip. The beads are shy, not enough to drink from directly, but enough to scent the air with the tiniest promise. The stone smells darker. The herbs smell greener. Everywhere the city has set little looms for air. Streets are not straight marches, but tuned instruments, angled to the prevalent breeze, stepping out of the sun's harsh line so that heat cannot pool in the same way for long. A lane narrows where it needs to quicken the flow, widens just before a door to calm it. Screens of carved wood, mashrabiyah, look like decoration to the hurried eye, but to the patient one, they are teeth and comb, ordering the unruly. Through them, air is pulled in many threads rather than one torn sheet, braided by shadow and light until the hiss of noon lowers its voice to a sigh. Some houses have more than a tower. They sink a throat into the earth. Down below, the ground keeps the memory of last winter's night. If there is an old Kanat tunnel nearby, a blind river of shade and seep, the house borrows its coolness politely. The windcatcher above and the earth below agreed to meet in the middle rooms, one pushing softly, the other pulling softly. In that balanced hush, the felt of the morning rug feels less prickly. A clay cup keeps its chill a little longer, and the corner where a jar waits for kitchen water grows uninteresting to flies. None of this is loud enough to boast about, yet an afternoon nap becomes possible, the highest praise in a harsh season. Watch how people move in such a house. They open or close a shutter by 2 fingers' breadth, and the temper of a room changes from sultry to bearable. They lower a damp cloth over the salsabīl when the sun leans too hard into the courtyard, and the cloth becomes a fine condenser, a friendly cousin to the fog net on a distant coast. In the hour when the shadow of the tower's lip reaches the far wall, there is always a name for that hour. Someone checks the floor's patterned draft with a candle flame. The flame bows just enough, the sign of a well-breathed home. It is a living arrangement with the sky. At night, terraces welcome radiative cooling. Beds aired on flat roofs, jars set in places where starlight can carry heat away into the deep. By 4 a.m., the same jars feel clammy. Lids are lifted, and the inside walls show a faint sweat. A cloth is wrung into a basin almost ceremonially, because even a handful matters. The city has learned to collect water from time rather than distance, from the 4 or 5 hours when the difference between stone and air is most polite, from the long inch between a draft and a still corner, from the exact thickness of a reed mat over a cistern mouth. In the tower,
The old timbers remember which summers asked for a splash tray and which begged for a drip thread instead. A drip thread is nothing more than a cord hung from a small jar, delivering a slow line of water onto the salsabīls so that the stone is never dry. Here, evaporation is not the enemy, it is harnessed. The water that leaves as breath returns as comfort, lowering temperature, raising the chance that somewhere else in the room a cooler surface will wring a few drops back from the air. That is the arithmetic of patience. Loss and gain circling like swallows, returning enough to live on. The windcatcher is also a teacher of humility. In a year of dusty gales, the tower's mouths are shuttered against the worst of it, and the house quiets itself with interior doors, heavy curtains, and earthen floors wet down at noon. In a year of soft breezes, the tower sings. People learn to read color in the evening sky, a copper edge to the horizon, a line of pale cloud, the particular shine on a neighbor's rooftop jar, their forecast, better than any almanac. They tune their days accordingly, shaping loaves, soaking lentils, soaking themselves in the shade while the tower makes a breathable afternoon. The city's map is really a diagram of how to touch the wind without bruising it. Gardens sit where the breeze returns from a long run over water, or green. Workshops that spit heat, kilns, dye pots, ovens, share walls with alleys that know how to carry that heat up and away. Even the minarets and bell towers help, breaking wakes, deflecting gusts into alleys that need a hand. Roof lines are not accidental. They are quiet fingers pointing, offering the air a courtesy route. There is, folded into all this, the eye of the water keeper, the person who loves small, repeatable miracles. They rise early to feel the draft on a cheek, to listen to the soft drumming of drops where they do gather, to wipe salt crust from a tray kept for that purpose alone. They do not measure wealth in wells alone, but in shade, in sound, in the body's willingness to move slowly. They learn that a house can drink without a river if it knows how to breathe. By late afternoon, when the sun has finally lost its sharp voice, the tower's mouths glow with a honey light. The salsabīl whispers, the mashrabiyah filigree stamps gentle geometry onto the walls. Someone waters the basil and a lemon sapling with what the house has saved from its own breath. A child follows the runnels with a finger, and in that simple map, tower, screen, stone, jar, finds the city's quiet oath. We will make friends with air and be repaid in cool finsips. And when night walks back in on bare feet, the wind turns silk slow. The house opens itself wider, rooftop door fastened back, shutters cracked, a pale jug set where stars can lean over it. The tower keeps breathing, not louder, just steadier. In the space between hot and cold, dry and less dry, movement and rest, a home becomes a cistern of comfort, held together by nothing more aristocratic than attention. The same thread that joined fog to a clay.
A city is not only walls and roofs and doors, it is a field of flows. If you could see air in slow motion, you would watch it pour and eddy like a pale river through the day. Cool currents slipping along shaded stones, warm updrafts peeling off sun-baked facades, tiny whirlpools pausing at stair corners, and a steady mid-height drift where alleys form a narrow canyon. The old builders could not see it either, but they learned to read its script. How pigeons tacked across a lane, how laundry lifted in a certain notch between houses, how lamp flame leaned in the same direction at the same hour. From this patient watching came a grammar for streets. Not straight, not defiant, but slightly turned and lightly bent, like a shoulder offered to a friend. Start with a lane that faces the morning. It is thin at one end, fat at the other, tapering like a flute so that the breeze is first coaxed, then released. Midway, the lane takes a polite dogleg, and the corner is rounded, no hard seam to trip the air. The masonry remembers fingers. Its edges are softened by years of hands, buckets, brooms, and the slow abrasion of dust. Above, small bridges of wood, roof to roof, cast dapple that keeps stone from going fever hot. Underfoot, the paving is uneven on purpose, slightly pebbled where the city wants you to slow down, smoother where the water carriers pass, and always sloped to show a trickle where a night's worth of dew might be swept toward the street tree whose roots braid below. There is a logic to door heights and window shapes. Ground floor openings are modest and deep-lipped. They drink shadow and return it to the street. Windows are louvered or latticed, tuned to the wind's pitch. In summer afternoons, slats tilt like the eyelids of the drowsy, letting just enough air pass to wipe sweat from the day's brow. In winter, they tighten, and the city shrinks into its wool. Yet even then, the streets are angled to spare each other the worst gales. Houses shoulder against the wind for their neighbors, trading protection for the promise that when the season reverses, they too will be shielded. At noon, rooftops collect the city's weather the way cisterns collect its water. A roof is a plain thing in diagrams, but in practice, it is a miniature landscape. Parapets that cut the gust to a usable draft. Low walls that throw shade for a jar. A half-height screen where mats dry and the wind combs through fibers. A patch of clay that cools faster than the adjoining stone. People come up with their chores like pilgrims to a plateau, carry rugs, lift jars, turn loaves to rest their crusts, tie a damp cloth where you'll sit at dusk. They leave the roof in better balance than they found it. Dried things turned, wet things aired, shadows rearranged by the tilt of a cloth. The city breathes more evenly for these small acts. Night belongs to the rooftops, but evening is their gentle rehearsal. As the sun gradients down from brass to copper to rose, families perform rituals so ordinary they seem like instinct. Jars are placed along the parapet's inner shade where sky can pull heat from them by its vast, patient thirst. A small basin sits on a trivet so air can pass underneath. In the basin, a cloth is spread like a placid lily pad, fed from a tiny jug that gives one careful drip every few heartbeats. Far away in the lane, a windcatcher makes its own music, but up here, it is the quiet of radiative exchange, the city gifting its heat to the dark and receiving gratitude as a cooler skin. You see the neighborhood's choreography when a breeze threads the houses. One roof lifts a mat just enough to speed the flow. 2 houses over, someone shutters a western mouth to prevent the draft from being scoured away. Across the lane, a woman loosens her hair to feel the quality of the air, a simple hygrometer, and nods to her neighbor, who opens the rooftop door just 1 hand's width. Below, in the street, a boy whose job is to sprinkle water from a dipper onto the dusty stones makes his circuit, laying down a thin, repeating constellation of damp that tames grit and invites a tender cool to rise. These are not orders, they are manners, polite gestures to the moving guest everyone depends on. Where the streets meet, the city borrows a trick from orchards, small plazas that are less open space than expansion joints in the flow. Trees sip from the morning drains, and their leaves brush drafts into soft threads. A low fountain, sometimes dry, sometimes murmuring, faces the wind so that, when it is wet, the breeze passes its cheek to the water,
comes away with the scent of stone and a little extra weight. Even when the fountain sleeps, the memory of damp keeps the plaza skin cool through the hottest hour. There is a bench where elders time their story to the bell of a distant tower shadow crossing a certain crack. There is a step where a cat always sleeps, knowing the swirl that collects there. The city does not forget these microclimates. It leans on them lightly. If you could climb to the highest ridge at midnight, you would see the district as a breathing animal. Heat sighing out of courtyards in longer and longer breaths as the night deepens. The cool settling on roof jars as a palpable hush. The occasional updraft where a kitchen cooled late. The fog nets live across the hills, but their cousins are here. Laundry lines that are left bare so that by dawn the cloth is hardly damp but strangely sweeter. Small polished stones set at the corners of parapets to glow dark with sky cool and later pressed to wrists. Copper bowls left inverted so their undersides condense a shy ring of dew to be kissed onto herb pots. Nothing is enough on its own. Everything contributes a sip. The map of the neighborhood is also a ledger of gifts. The baker, whose oven spends heat like coins, has a back wall facing an alley that likes to climb. The alley takes the day's excess and gives it to the night sky, and by morning both alley and baker are forgiven. The dye house uses a roof screen to keep wind from biting too hard at the threads, but in exchange it leaves a small trough where the evening cool can gather and be spilled at dawn into the street basin. The school sets its windows in opposition, one low, one high, so that the teacher's chalk hand stays dry, and in return, the children are sent at sunset to turn the jars that sat as sentinels along the parapets. Reciprocity is the city's quiet law. Ritual gives shape to all this. There is the candle test, once a week, same corner, same hour, to see whether the street's draft still bows the flame just so. There is the knot tying lesson, how to make a drip thread that doesn't fatten into drops too quickly, taught on rooftops to children who grin at the magic of a waterline thin as a hair. And there is the dawn sweep, a low broom for dust and a high broom for vision, clearing both stone and habit so that the day begins unencumbered. And on the year's longest heat, neighbors trade fig leaves and basil sprigs, bringing each other the scent that tells a body, breathe slower, you have help. When a new house rises, the whole street joins its making, not for the walls, which masons know by heart, but for the angles. A woman remembers where the north winds sulked 2 summers ago. A man points to where the kite always tugged hardest. Another brings a glazed shard worn smooth, holds it to the lip of a parapet to be, watches how the faintest draft kisses its face, and says, "Tilt it 1 finger." By the time the house wears its final cap of clay and the door receives its first shade, the neighborhood has already welcomed it into the flow. The house will drink with them. The house will breathe with them. This is how a city becomes a reservoir without water stacked in high towers. It stores comfort in habits, in alignments, in attention. Morning cool is saved in thick walls and shared back in late afternoon. Fog gathered on distant nets arrives as a better nap at noon. The rooftop rituals write an account book the body reads, heat paid down, cool earned patiently, breath carried forward. And when a hard season comes, as it always does, the street does not panic. It narrows its eyes, it slows its step, it tightens its weave. It keeps teaching itself the old lesson. The smallest sips add up. By the hour when stars feel close enough to touch, the parapets are a low parliament of jars, the lanes are a procession of softened stones, and the wind is not a trickster, but a steady friend, asked to do nothing impossible, only to be heard, shaped, and thanked. A child sleeps with a polished dark stone in their palm. A widow lays a damp cloth near the rooftop stair. A cat blinks at a corner where air pools like warm milk and decides to move 2 steps into a cooler cup of night. The city breathes out, the jars breathe in, and somewhere, faint as promises, the first drops of the next dawn's fog are beginning to gather on threads stretched between pools.
There comes a season when the sky forgets itself, when dawns arrive clean as polished bone and evenings fall without that soft damp that makes a roof jar smile. The air is a keeper of grudges then. It carries heat like a remembered slight, and its hands, once generous with beads, return empty. The fog nets stand like patient harps with no strings to pluck. The windcatchers breathe, but what they receive has the dryness of a ledger overdue. To live through these months is to practice a compounded patience, the patience of repair, of careful loss, of kindness that is measured in cupfuls. Before the hard stretch truly takes hold, the people prepare in a way that looks like tidying but is really strategy. Meshes are lowered a handspan to rest their nerves and to keep the border cords from hardening into salt bands. The posts are given new collars of stone so the ground won't slump when it is asked to hold and hold again. Their sleeves are oiled with a thin smear of soap and ash to keep grit from sawing at threads. The runnels are dressed, every faint rasper nude, every shallow rise planed flat with sand and cloth. Because in a thirsty season, a bead that hesitates too long becomes a ghost. In courtyards, salsabīl lips are rubbed to satin with patience, and the stipple beneath is refreshed with a fine stone, restoring the texture that invites vapor to become brave. Fail-safes are readied like lullabies you hum before sleep. A quiet jug is placed under the final turn of each line, a small shadowed reserve that catches what might otherwise evaporate from a long tray. Its lid is netted and cool, and a child is taught which finger to lay on it to feel whether the jug is honest. In the windcatcher, a drip thread is tied thinner and longer, its cadence slowed so that each departing drop purchases more comfort for the room and leaves behind a cooler skin that might wring a few shy beads back from the air. The old brass bell, hung from a thread in a shaded doorway, is tuned with a shorter cord so that it complains a little more readily. Its sulk becomes a signal that a shutter needs a new angle or a cloth should be laid in the doorway's throat. When the dusk does come, inevitably, indifferently, it arrives as a rumor first, a change in sound, the world's edges taking on a pale stroke, a taste like warm chalk on the tongue. Then it is everywhere, in the net, on the salsabīl, under the lid of a jar that was not quick enough. Repairs after a dust storm are a choreography of softness. Meshes are not scoured, they are bathed. A basin is filled with warm water and the whisper of vinegar, and panels are lowered into it like a child into sleep. Salt and dust let go in their own time. Border cords are rolled between palms to break the stubborn crust without snapping the fibers. Each knot is checked, not yanked, because a thirsty season punishes impatience by turning a small fray into a dramatic tear. Streets do their own healing. After a storm, water is too precious to squander, so the city uses breath itself. Rooftop brooms lift, not scrape. Willow and grass flick the mats and jars awake, sending a fine sigh of dust back into the sky. In lanes, palm-rib brooms calm corners while a boy walks with a dipper, placing small stars of damp at door thresholds and plaza stones, just enough to lay grit but not enough to make mud. The neighborhood listens. Flags hung on strings show whether the flow resumes its old courtesy, and the tin song along a parapet edge will tell you if a shutter is still out of tune. If the bell in the doorway chokes and chatters, someone lowers a reed screen a finger width more to calm the draft into threads so that salsabīls don't gulp, they sip. Sharing becomes a craft as exact as knot tying. The etiquette of sips is a map etched in habit. First, plants that feed are watered,
then those that shade, then those that cheer. A basil's cup before a fig's fullness, a young lemon's half-hand before an old vine's indulgence. The lane's dust receives the faintest dashed line along its spine, enough to hold a breeze without letting it bite. If a house has an honest surplus, a quiet jug that feels better than expected, the lid is given a small chalk mark at dawn. Neighbors know the mark and the hour. Anyone may come by with a cup, take one measure to the scribe line inside, and leave a leaf, mint, fig, laurel, as thanks. The leaves later dry on a tray and return to the neighborhood as a teapot shared at dusk, the taste of reciprocity thin but real. There are rituals for the thirst itself. At the year's stingiest noon, the street grows slower, voices lower, and chairs are drawn into the braided shade where the air still remembers morning. Children are taught the cold places by touch, the underside of a parapet where the night cooled stone most deeply, the back of the salsabīl where shadow clings and breath turns silk, the jar's shoulder at dawn, darkened by sky cool. They carry these maps in their hands, press the cooled stone to their foreheads, learn the difference between a breeze that bites and a draft that lifts. The measure of a thirsty season is not how often you complain, but how many good places you can show to a friend. Houses practice loss that is not surrender. The drip to the salsabīl is thinned. The tray is shaded by a reed mat so that what leaves can be coaxed into comfort rather than squandered. Laundry is left on lines at night not to dry, but to sweeten. At dawn, it carries a cool you can wear, and that counts as a kind of drink. Wide basins are set on tripods so air can laze underneath. A cloth laid across becomes a skin that feeds the house's breath instead of appeasing the sky's thirst alone. Jars meant for drinking are wrapped in damp, darkened covers and moved each evening to where the stars can pull heat from them, while the lids keep the gift they receive from slipping away. We cannot keep water, the elders say. We can keep ways. Dust has a way of teaching repair beyond cleaning. The salsabīl's face, worn smooth by 1,000 quiet days, might need its stipple renewed. A careful retexturing with a fine stone, eyes closed, fingertips reading the return of tooth. A mesh whose heart has grown slack is given a second border cord, a soft frame stitched in like a supportive arm so that tension distributes and fraying edges rest. A post whose foot has loosened is lifted at dusk, its hole fed with a slurry of clay and straw, the old survival wall in miniature, then tamped with a loving patience. The clay holds the cool of the night and returns it to the post through the day, a tiny kindness that keeps fibers from shrinking and swelling to death. When the sky is stingy, counting is a form of prayer, not for boasting, but for truth. Each morning, a cupful is logged with a dull pencil, which panel gave, which runnel sulked, where the draft bowed a candle, where it would not. The notebook's pages smell of vinegar and clean sand. Their edges are rubbed smooth by thumbs. In the margins are plans for makeshift redundancy. If the ridge nets fail for a week, the courtyard will take a second drip line. If the windcatcher's north mouth chokes with heat, the south shutter will be widened and the interior doors will be taught the afternoon rhythm. Open 2 fingers, close 1, breathe, repeat. The public places keep their own vows. The plaza fountain, often dry, becomes a bank of cool rather than a spender of water. Its stone is scrubbed and shaded. Benches are moved to where the fountain's body holds night. The baker, who spends heat from dawn to noon, agrees to cool the oven earlier and leaves a jar on the alley's climbing draft. His surplus chalk mark appears near the oven door at twilight. The dyer lays damp threads under a woven screen that lets the breeze pass but refuses to let the sun bully. In exchange, she opens her roof for neighbors' jars on the year's worst days. Another chalk mark, another quiet ledger entry. There is also the etiquette of stopping. Certain tasks are not done in thirst. No one scours a courtyard stone at noon. No one pulls a net tight when grit is in the air. Clay is not fired when the wind is soaking. Bread is shaped smaller, dried more slowly, and never left to steam the room that others must sit in. A house will give up a lovely breeze to the street if the street needs it. A door left open becomes a loan. A louver angle guessot becomes a charity. Take the cool, someone says with a chin tilt, and the neighbor bows. And later they trade the kindness back by loosening a mat at the right moment or sharing the night's first star-cooled cup. When a change finally comes, it is seldom dramatic. A rumor of damp returns to the pre-dawn stones. The brass bell in the doorway stops sulking. The net drinks a little. The salsabīl's lip feels a shy pulse. Repairs become resting instead of emergency. The city stretches, not with shouts, but with longer breaths. The chalk marks on spare jugs thin as needs ease. The plaza fountain reclaims a murmur. The alley by the baker loses its fever by an hour. It is then, when the heart lifts almost to
stand first where the sea keeps its long, slow conversation with land. The coast is a listener before it is a builder. Mornings arrive as if poured from a gray pitcher, a sea breath that fogs cliff grass, silvers spider silk, and rolls like a careful animal over low headlands. Here, fog nets take on the patience of fishermen who have learned tides by hands and knuckles. Posts climb in even ranks where the breeze slips shoreward most reliably. Panels are set not on the crest, where gusts bully and unmake beads, but one shoulder down, where wind still carries its water, yet has forgotten some of its temper. Salt is everywhere, a glitter in the air, a rough kiss on mesh, and the craft becomes half water-gathering, half salt-keeping. On the coast, the weave is a little coarser and the border cords heavier. Salt crystals like to carve threads into brittle pencils. A smoother core with a brushed skin gives the bead a foothold without letting crystals grow barbed. Each panel is tied in a way that accepts a long, slow heave, the sway of a post that has listened to waves since it was set. Runnels are stone, but their faces wear a faint, sea-wise polish so that salt can be sloughed in the weekly bath. Buckets warmed by sun, a whisper of vinegar, a handful of clean sand rubbed in circles that remember the tides. At the foot of each line, a small sacrificial bowl sits to take the first brine. Better it salts than the jar. Children are taught to taste with just the tip of a finger, the difference between honest sea sweet and the sharp that will tire a throat. Birds teach lessons you cannot buy. Gulls claim a post as if it were a mild island. Cormorants spread their black coats like rain-proofed capes on a morning wire. Their weight and insistence tell the keepers which points the wind favors most, which perches sing with beads sooner than others. Nets learn to share with birds. A sleeve of bark on a favorite post shoulder, a shifting of corner knots so a habitual landing does not bruise the mesh. In return, birds leave small signals, feathers in lee-side tussocks, fish scales glinting near a trench, tiny charts of how the air moved while people slept. Highlands teach a different grammar. Here, the land leans up to the sky's belly, and fog becomes cloud that has run out of excuses. It moves uphill in slow, generous sheets. It stoops to tree branches. It braids itself into moss. Ridgelines are narrow rulings across a page. Valleys are soft bowls that hold cool longer than sense suggests. Anabatic winds climb toward noon. Katabatic winds fall after sunset. Two musics that score the day. Nets in these places wear a finer face and a lighter hand. They are stitched to respect the mountain's quick changes. Morning's standing breath, midday's combed drafts, evening's downslope hush. Highland keepers study shadows like sailors study stars. A fog shadow, where cloud thins as it climbs a shoulder then condenses again on the lee side, makes a stripe of generosity you cannot see unless you wait. Panels are set to intercept those stripes. Trees are co-workers.
Branches become natural meshes, rough bark inviting invisible jewels to gather and fall, leaf tips teaching water to choose edges. Some villages string auxiliary lines under boughs, not nets so much as polite gutters, letting the forest do the first catch and the cords the last persuasion. Runnels run narrower here, steeper, with small check stones placed like commas so water pauses without losing courage. What the coast learns from the highlands arrives on days of storm. When the sea forgets its restraint and hammers fog to rain, the highland trick of edges, not faces, saves meshes from a beating. Panels turn to finger width, so drops graze, not slam. Border cords lifted off posts with a leather spacer, so they don't chafe to failure. The highland habit of doubles, two smaller nets separated by an arm span instead of one big sail, finds a home atop coastal bluffs, giving the wind somewhere to rest between kindnesses. And when brine grows rude, the mountain's rights for grit become a coastal salvation, a mid-season quieting where panels are lowered, washed, and left to breathe in shade for a day, like horses rubbed down and walked out after hard pulling. What the highland borrows from the coast is a philosophy of slow salts and long baths. Inland fog carries less bite, but dust can be a different tyranny. Volcanic flour, dried lake bed memories, seasons when the world turns to a fine beige thought and tries to write itself into every stitch. The coast's brine bath wisdom becomes dust bath wisdom here. The same warm water, the same gentle sand, the same refusal to scrub anger into a fiber. And coastal runnels, those with a faint polish to shed crust, are copied with mountain stone. A stripe of smoother face near the lip of a salsabīl keeps mountain silt from deciding to live there. Beneath, stipple returns to invite vapor. Both schools share a bookmaker's love of margins. Along cliffs, shrubs are planted in loose hedges that break gusts into threads before they meet mesh. On ridges, low stone wings curl like careful ears around net lines to quiet corner turbulence. On the coast, hedges choose species that laugh at salt and give shade to runnels. On the mountain, stone chooses shapes that hide cool from noon. Both places let the land make the first move and then answer with a small turn, a gentle bevel, a line tied one knot lower than pride would permit. Transport is choreography, not just burden. A seaside jar is stout and shoulders its way along terraced paths to kitchens and cisterns. A mountain jar is looser-shouldered, so it can ride a back better, wrapped in wool, trading slosh for steadiness along ledges where attention is one's wealth. Donkey paths on the coast wear grooves that will outlast most names. In the highlands, a human foot and a staff right the road fresh each morning. In both places, carrying water is a procession rather than a scramble. It is timed with the cool. Coastal returning before the onshore breeze grows bitter with sun. Highland descending before katabatic winds thicken the shadows. Customs grow from terrain. On the shore, first cups rinse salt from clay mouths and cool ovens' lips. Bread there is introduced to sky water with a quick wash that softens the day's sternness. In the highlands, first cups kiss seedlings in the soles of boots. Mountaineers bless the trail with a sprinkle where rock steps down to dust, a tiny engineering of grip that is also a superstition. The etiquette of sharing follows the same geography. Seaside chalk marks arrive early, after fog-heavy dawns. Ridgetown chalk marks arrive late, after evening downslope breath has fattened jars in secret, when stars have done their patient work on stone and skin. There are different enemies, so there are different fail-safes. Coasts fear salt hardening and sudden gales. They use bark sleeves and copper ribbons to whisper lightning away to a jar of charcoal and ash. Highlands fear ice on mesh and lightning's short temper. They favor removable panels that sleep indoors on the night a storm's teeth are near, and they set posts in clay collars that absorb the cold wet and return it as a gentler damp. Coasts learn to listen for a rope that sings too bright, salt in its throat. Highlanders listen for a panel that hums too low, ice in its threads. Both answer with the same medicine: warmth, shade, time, hands. In each school, ears are instruments. Sea towns keep a doorbell on thread, tuned short to complain at the least change. Mountain hamlets keep a pinwheel of reed triangles under an eave. The faintest click-click says the katabatic has awaked, and someone rises to set jars where stars can drink their heat. Candles test drafts in both places, but the mountain candle's lesson comes earlier in the evening, when the sky's edge has not laid its cool hand on the slopes. The coastal candle gives its truth in the hour before sun finds the sea again, when fog is considering rebirth. The curriculums cross in the bodies of the keepers. A coastal keeper visiting a ridge feels at first the loneliness of a horizon that withholds the line of water. Then they notice the abundant patience of mountain moss and the generosity of cloud that deigns to touch lichen. A ridge keeper on a headland misses the way valleys hold cool like bowls. Then they notice that gulls are weather vanes you can bribe with bark sleeves and quiet corners. They trade knots and rights. A ridgebow line that leaves a fat loop for gloved hands. A shore constrictor tied with a leather buffer to resist salt bite. They trade calendars, which mornings are stingiest, which weeks bless, which doorways sulk. What returns with them is not novelty, but permission. To adjust, to borrow, to let place teach without pride. Between coast and highland lies a third classroom. The fog forests and paramo, where plants are themselves nets, where leaves end in drip tips that write water down to roots, where epiphytes hang like green lace. People there plant like engineers, lines of native shrubs arranged to comb cloud as it passes, fences built of living stakes that sprout and add to the catch, paths paved with stones that darken at night and give dew back by dawn.
The kitchen is where air learns to become taste. All day long, the house has been coaxing small mercies from breath. Threads turn to drops, drafts trained into cool. But it is here, among clay and grain and quiet fire, that those sips are invited to speak. Sky water has a shy voice. It needs calm jars, gentle hands, and the kind of patience that lets a bead finish its sentence before you drink. Step first into the shade where the cistern lives. It is not a grand vault, just a calm throat in the courtyard, lime-washed to a pale milk so light slides softly down its sides. Above it hangs a lid that is more manner than lock, wood faced with thin clay, a gauze set under it like a modest veil. The lid is a promise to the water that it can keep what it has learned in the night. Along the rim runs a cool lip of stone that darkens after sunset, then goes paler toward noon, marking the day's breath like a sundial of skin. A narrow channel brings the morning's gathered drops down in a hush, and sends away the first, faintly salted sip to a sacrificial bowl. Only after that small courtesy does the cistern accept the rest. Inside, the walls remember old recipes. Lime and fine sand, a blush of pozzolan sifted with care, nothing that shouts, only textures that do not argue with water. The bottom is a patient slope, a thumb's rise over an arm's run, encouraging settle rather than swirl. Grain-sized charcoal sleeps in a shallow bed at one end, kept fresh by the house's unhurried cycle of cooking and coals. Pebbles sit above it like a harmless sky. Sky water is already clean in a way river water envies, but this bed gives it a place to rest its tiny burdens. A bit of dust from a proud ridge wind, a salt whisper from a coastal morning, a leaf's fine memory from a living fence that combed the fog. The house does not boast of purity, it tends to quiet. Drawing from the cistern is a slow etiquette. The first ladle at dawn is for waking the kitchen, moistening flour bins so crumbs do not rise as ghosts, blessing the breadboard, wetting the rim of a clay cup that will teach tea to taste cooler by touch alone. The second is for the day's dough.
Sourdough likes sky water not because it is magical, but because it is modest. It arrives without river moods and lets the starter's gossip be the loudest voice in the bowl. A third is set aside in a jar whose shoulders were dark with night. It will become the midday pot's gentle courage, turning lentils into kindness without demanding a flame that bites. Jars for carrying and keeping are chosen like friends. The drinking jar is thick-shouldered, its clay fired just shy of pride, so that it will sweat a little, evaporation writing tenderness on its skin. Its mouth wears a net, gauze and reed cord that keeps flies respectful and air honest. The cooking jar is a touch brighter in tone and cooler to the thumb. It sits near the stove's cooler corner, where heat is a rumor rather than a demand. Each evening the jars go up to the roof to lend their warmth to the sky. Each dawn they return with calmer hearts. The kitchen can taste the difference. A water that slept under stars carries a breath the clay understands, and it passes that breath to rice and bread with no argument. Flavor is not just what the tongue knows, it is what the pot remembers. Clay seasonings are as old as soot. A new pot is rubbed inside with salt and a whisper of oil, heated empty until it sighs, then cooled with a little sky water that's not for drinking, just to teach the micro-cracks how to be kind. After a week of stews whose broths never boil in anger, the pot has a softness that leans toward comfort. When a pot misbehaves, gives back a metallic frown or tires the tongue, the kitchen mends it with patience. A night filled to the brim with clean water and a few leaves of mint. A day sitting in the coolest shadow, then a gentle return to the stove with lentils and lemon peel. Pots are like people in a thirsty season. They do better when you let them sleep. Some mornings the kitchen stitches a tiny filter for company. A folded cloth of linen, rinsed in boiled water, cooled under a jar's dark shoulder, draped over a funnel of clay. Sky water poured through it is not changed so much as calmed. Dust is persuaded to remain. A rogue speck is told a friendly story and asked to stay behind. In households that keep a habit from the old apothecaries, a small silver coin lives in the bottom of the carrying jar, not as a miracle, but as an old belief in quiet metal and its sweetening companionship. Whether or not the coin does anything more than glint, it reminds the hand that lifted it to be exacting with lids and careful with shadows. Reverence is also hygiene. Salt and sky water have a marriage counselor in the kitchen. Bread made with fog-caught water requires salt that listens. A pinch more in a coastal town that forgives brine quickly. A pinch less under a generous ridge where beads had no taste of sea. The dough tells the truth to the palm. The proofing ball writes marginal notes on its warm skin. This morning needed patience. This one asked for a livelier starter. The first loaf, once cooled, is introduced to moisture with a sip on the crust, a tradition that is both gratitude and calibration. Steam rises, a tiny weather in the room. The loaf learns the neighborhood, and the neighborhood learns the loaf. Tea is the kitchen's way of measuring a day without numbers. A clay kettle lidded with a small notch sips steam even when the flame is gone. The first pour, barely colored, is for the cistern, returned as thanks along the little runnel that keeps the charcoal's bed polite. The second pour is for the elders, who drink leaves and memory. The third is for the hands that mended the net, calloused fingers wrapped around warm cups, faces softened. In coasts, tea carries a shy echo of evening salt. In highlands, it has the high, clean edge of stone after rain. Both are small lectures in landscape delivered to the lip. Soups keep secrets. A pot set on 3 small stones so air can pass underneath makes a breath you can taste. Sky water that cooled under stars persuades onions to go translucent at a lower temper, and that lowers the day's shoulders for the cook. Lentils take to such water with relief, each skin surrendering without a fight. A strip of lemon peel kept from last week, dried in the high shadow behind the stove, returns that stored sunlight to the broth. A pinch of ground sumac whispers of dusk. A kitchen that drinks air makes soup that feeds patience. Not all sky water goes to mouths. A shallow basin under the window, set on a low trivet so air can court it, keeps hands honest and plants forgiving. The washing of herbs is measured. First the ones that feed, then the ones that cool, finally the ones that cheer. The leftover damp is brushed into the courtyard dust in 5 small arcs. Then the broom writes a 6th arc that gathers the gift toward the roots of the small lemon tree. The lemon has a different thirst from the basil, and the ledger in the mind remembers this quietly as it tends spoons, boards, and the rim of the cistern. The cistern's mindfulness is measured in silence. Once a week, the house gives it a listening day. No drawing, no pouring in. Only the bell on the doorway and the reed pinwheel keeping watch. The charcoal bed is lifted, aired in a shaded breeze, patted back like a pillow. The lime washing brush, soft, almost comical, is walked around the inner face where the water does not reach, and the thing wash is fed to the thirsty plaster above the line so dust has no reason to cling. The sacrificial bowl is rubbed clean with warm water and a pinch of sand, and its first drink the next morning is poured over the salsabīl's lip as an offering to cool. Children learn the rules of jars as if learning pleases. Never dip a hand. The cup pours, the lips drink. Lids live on jars. Lids do not wander off to gossip with spoons. A cloth that has kissed raw meat does not, for a week, go near a mouth. These are not scoldings, but inheritances, ways to keep the shy water from forgetting itself. On hot days, children are taught to wear their cool instead of drinking it all at once. A damp scarf on the neck, a smooth dark stone from the parapet pressed to the wrist, a brief hand held over the salsabīl to let breath learn manners. Sips are saved this way, naps are earned. When guests come, the kitchen sets a small ceremony. A plain cup is placed beside a decorated one. The decorated cup receives a mouthful from the jar that slept under stars. The plain cup receives a mouthful from the jar that sat in kitchen shade. Guests taste both, and the talk begins, not of which is better, but of which carries which hour. A ridge guest talks about katabatic breath and the feel of stones underfoot. A coastal guest speaks of gulls and a bell that sulked less this week. The kitchen becomes a border between weathers. The table becomes a map. There are fail-safes even here, where kindness seems reliable. If the sky sulks for a month and the jars go stingy, the kitchen switches to a humbler arithmetic. Rice is rinsed not thrice, but twice, with a saved cloth placed over the bowl to catch the stray glimmer of starch. The dough is wetter and
Storms are not mistakes. They are emphatic sentences in the language of weather. They arrive with their own grammar, commas of lull, clauses of gust, long, reckless verbs of rain. And the art is not to argue, but to answer in the right tense. Villages that live by fog nets and wind threads keep a set of manners for shouted days. Lower, loosen, quiet, shield, wait, read, mend. The aim is a soft resilience, the kind that returns to form without remembering the stress in its bones. At the first rumor, a distant hum flattening to a steady tone on tin, a gull's flight shortened to harsh flaps, laundry lifting in jerks, the keepers use their early punctuation. Nets are lowered a hand or two from their windy syntax. Tension is eased until the border chords hum like a deep string rather than scream like a wire. Corners are refitted with leather buffers so the mesh can slide a little under shock. A panel that usually faces the breeze squarely is turned by a thumb's width, not to defy, but to give raindrops edges to graze rather than faces to slap. Runnels are cleared to their quiet polish, then given a line of small check stones, like ellipses, so a sudden gush will pause and not leap the lip. There is a music to heavy wind, and houses have ears. In lanes,
Reed screens are lowered to comb the gust into many smaller threads. Shutters are set neither wide nor tight, but to a middle vowel that prevents the howl. A door is taught to breathe. Latch unfastened, rope halter looped, a wooden wedge set to leave a thumb of gap so pressure does not build and blow the latch into anger. Mashrabia slats are gently crisscrossed to break eddies into lacework, and interior doors are aligned in sequence, one finger open, then two, then one again, to lead the draft through rooms like a guest shushed at night. If rain forgets its manners and arrives with fistfuls of grit, the village changes meter. The salsabīls face, usually a place for the room to drink, is shaded by a reed mat set on light sticks so that the water sheet becomes a whisper instead of a shout. Drip threads are lengthened and thinned, their cadence slowed. Each drop a small purchase of cool instead of a reckless expense. The cistern's sacrificial bowl is moved forward to the runnel's first bend, a brave little shield that takes the first brine and silt, so the throat below stays calm. Clay lids gain weight, pebbles tied in a small pouch, so a tantrum of wind cannot pry them and teach jars bad habits. On coasts, storms come with salt in their pockets. Meshes there wear bark sleeves at the shoulders and copper ribbons that whisper lightning into a buried jar of charcoal and ash. When the sky turns iron and speaks with knives, panels are loosened, not tightened, given the grace to bow and survive. The keeper's mallet taps post feet. 1 tap, 3 taps, listening for a dulling that says the soil has drunk too much and forgotten firmness. If it has, stones are fed to the collar, and a slurry of clay and straw is packed in like kindness, carrying night cool forward even through a shouting day. Birds land where they should not, on a corner with too much sway, and the keeper answers by shifting a knot, offering a new perch that will not bruise the net. Highlands read storms by temperature. A front that claws uphill brings thin cold that turns drops to stinging pearls on threads. Panels there are taken down quickly and slept indoors on pegs, their place marked by stones. In their stead, living meshes, the edges of shrub hedges and tree boughs, shoulder the storm without complaint, delivering their caught water along drip tips to soil that knows how to hold it. If sleet writes its rough script on stone, runnels are brushed with warm cloth and a breath of vinegar to keep the first glaze from teaching ice where to live. A reed pinwheel under an eave becomes a metronome. When its clicks go uneven, someone moves to the roof stair and resets a mat that was making mischief of the flow. Storm grammar extends to people as well. Chores are conjugated differently. Carry becomes wait. Sweep becomes settle. Mend becomes listen. Children learn the storm side of the house, the leeward rooms where pressure is gentler, where a candle flame will still bow politely, where jars can be shaded from tantrums of light. Work shifts to what resists shock, repairing knot memory with calm hands, dressing a bowline cleanly so it does not capsize under load, rubbing a salsabīl lip to satin while thunder tells its old stories. Meals change timbre. Pots set on 3 stones so air can steal heat softly. Tea brewed in 2 pourings rather than 3 to save the calm water for later. Between gusts, the village reads. Bells on threads sulk and chide. Their complaints are a topographic line of the storm's pressure. Tin edges sing 2 notes, one bright, one dull. The interval says whether a shutter is out of tune or the wind itself is shifting. Candles and niches bow farther than the ledger's good angle, and then, in a sudden kindness, stand almost straight. That is the comma in the storm sentence, the moment to go to the ridge and let off a knot, to add a leather buffer, to lift cornerstones into the trench so the runnel keeps respect in the rush. A kitchen has its own storm lexicon.
The cistern's lid is weighted and its gauze is doubled. The charcoal bed, aired the day before, is patted down with a whisper of boiled water so dust thinks twice. The sacrificial bowl is scrubbed with warm water and sand and welcomed to take the first rude draught again and again, emptied with a two-hand pour over the salsabīls, so the rudeness buys comfort. Bread is mixed with sky water that slept under stars the night prior. The dough rests longer, rises calmer. When wind slaps, the kitchen lowers its flame and cooks a soup that doesn't demand attendance, the kind that tastes of patience more than spice. Storms reveal weak habits. A knot that was tied, not dressed, will tell on itself with a thin cry. A post that was proud, rather than thoughtful, will pry at its foot. A runnel with a vanity-smooth section will throw spray where it should sing. The keepers take notes in the ledger with blunt pencils, leaving wet thumbprints beside the lines that will be fixed at first light. Add a sheep shank to tame length. Rotate the border cord so yesterday's hero can rest. Roughen the mirror patch near the lip. Plant 3 shrubs in a ragged braid upwind to comb the gusts into threads. Storms are audits. Repairs are promises. Sharing changes tone but not principle. In a shouting day, the plaza fountain is a spine for cool rather than a cup. Benches are moved close to its stone body. Jar lids are checked by a friendly neighbor's hand, and chalk marks appear on spare jugs later, after the punctuation of the downpour, when roofs have given breath back to sky and jars have cooled. The baker trims an hour from heat to ease the alley's fever. The dyer laces a mat to a roof screen and invites 3 neighbors' jars beneath its drip-tamed drip. The etiquette is firm. No one steals a draft that would stitch a street back together. Sometimes a storm decides to teach humility at scale. Lightning walks the ridge and finds the copper, running cleanly into charcoal and earth. Everyone exhales. Then comes the hard test, rain that turns to mud where the trench bends. The answer is not heroics, but 3 ordinary moves. Set 2 rounded stones as a check. Drive a tiny groove for the rebellious trickle. Lay a reed across the turn so water's arrogance is combed into threads. If a panel tears, it is taken down without grieving, stitched under a roof with a fisherman's knot and patience. The border cord moved so the wound will never be asked to be a seam again. There is a ritual for the end, when the verb of the storm slows to a participle. Nets rise in increments, the height of a fist, then another, listening as they go. Drip threads return to their calmer cadence. Runnels are walked barefoot so souls can read what eyes miss. A lip too slick, a corner that needs a comma stone. Bells are retuned, cords lengthened back to their usual sulk, tin edges smoothed with a thumb. Children gather laundry that has been more wind than cloth and shake it into gentleness. The candle test returns to its familiar angle, and the ledger receives its final marks. Louder than last year. North mouth too proud. Reed comb saved the corner. Bowline remembered. Birds forgave us. By night, the village is a soft inventory. Knots dressed and sleeping, sleeves checked and oiled. Clay lids thrum true when tapped. The cistern glows pale milk. The courtyard has the tidy look of a room.
A craft that lives on patience must be taught on patience. No one is born knowing how to talk to wind, how to make fog feel safe enough to fall, how to read the sulk or sigh of a shaded bell. So the village arranges time the way it arranges air, with soft turns, small edges, and a long, forgiving slope. Apprentices arrive with wrists that itch to pull rope hard, and with eyes that want big answers. Elders meet them with knots that refuse to hurry, with stories that begin in one season and finish in another. The first lesson is not tying, but touching. An elder lays a strip of mesh over the apprentice's open palm and says, "Count the roughness." The child rubs lightly and admits they can't. "Good," says the elder. "You won't be tempted to sand it smooth." They trace a border cord with 2 fingers and feel the brushed skin that grips without biting. They touch the post sleeve, leather worn to silk where storms have practiced, and learn that comfort for a rope is not luxury, but longevity. Over days, the hand becomes an eye. The apprentice can tell when a mesh is too tight by the way it whispers when shaken. They hear a knot's vanity and the small creak it makes when it should instead breathe. Knotwork comes next, but it is given names that are verbs rather than nouns. A bowline is promise. A clove hitch is begin. A constrictor is hold fast, then rest. A lock's head on a reed is listen. The elder ties the knot once, slowly, talking through it as if telling a bedtime story. The rabbit comes out of the hole, goes around the tree, returns to the hole. Then the apprentice ties it thrice, once looking, once glancing, once only feeling, because a storm will ask for the third. Mistakes are celebrated and corrected with a soft mallet. That one capsized, let it breathe. Or, you pulled pride into that loop, dress it until the line looks like it wanted to be there. Listening tools are part of the schooling. An apprentice holds the feather fan over a draft gap and watches its trembling edge tell the truth. They learn the doorway bell's moods, how a thread shortened by 2 grains of rice will turn sulk into song, and they write this in the ledger with a symbol that looks like a small ladder. They take the candle test with an elder's wrist just behind theirs to steady impatience. When the flame bows too far, they learn to adjust the shutter a finger width and to wait a full minute before deciding anything. Teaching is not a show of tricks. It is the choreography of waiting. There is a syllabus, though no one calls it that. Spring is for edges, learning why a panel turned by a thumb's width changes the fate of a drop, why a reed screen's angle can comb a gust into threads. Summer is for shadows, moving jars along parapets until clay learns the night and returns it to noon, reading which walls drink the cool and which merely sip. Autumn is for ledgers, writing arrows that mean soon and squares that mean stingy, learning that a map is a conversation, not a law. Winter is for repairs, renewing stipple on a salsabīl with eyes closed so fingertips become cartographers, washing salt from mesh without scrubbing anger into fibers, stitching a tear so the scar never has to be a seam again. Elders teach with stories that end in small, exact motions. "The year the girls laughed at us," says one, and the children lean in. "It was a season when posts were set proud on a crest, and the wind slapped fog flat. The girls balanced in the gust, scolding and amused. The lesson's end is a low curve of shrubs planted just off the ridge, a setback of nets by an arm's length, and a post angled away from the pull by a quiet degree. We made a place for the wind to rest," the elder concludes, and the apprentices mark a little arc in their ledgers, then in their muscles. Failure is required. An apprentice is in charge of a single drip thread for a week. The cadence goes fat, then thin, then petulant. They insist on tightening the jaws knot. The elder smiles and suggests wetting the thread's heart instead. The rhythm returns. Drop, breath, drop. On the ridge, a corner knot slips under a shouty gust because the clove hitch was tied, not dressed. The panel scolds. The elder does not. Together they add a leather buffer and shift the knot to a calmer grain of cord. "Now tell the ledger what the knot learned," the elder says. And the apprentice writes, "Tie, then dress, tighten, then loosen, demand, then listen." Rituals mark progress more than certificates. The first dressed knot is celebrated at dusk,
when the apprentice ties a bowline blindfolded and then pours a cup of sky water through it without a drop, snared in pride. The candle's friend comes after 3 months, when their hand has learned to wait until wax pools before judging a street's new angle. The stipple night has no audience, only the apprentice, a fine stone, and the silent lip of the salsabīl, roughness restored one soft circle at a time. Later, with a fingertip dampened and placed against the face, they feel the invitation they have rebuilt. Beads will have places to gather. Elders are patient politicians between houses and seasons. They translate a hard wind into gentle work, a fearful storm into tasks that resist panic. They carry the ledger like a storybook and a mirror, open to the smudged jaw squares, closed on the page where the neighborhood promised never to steal a draft from a tired lane. They interfere rarely and exactly. One finger under a border cord so a child can see how too tight becomes true. One knuckle pressing a runnel bind so the rebellious trickle learns manners. One word enough when hands start to tidy toward vanity rather than function. There is apprenticeship beyond the practical, ethics that take root the way moss does. Water first the hands that mend, say the margins in the atlas, and the apprentices bring cups to those who washed mesh and brushed salt, not to those who watched. Design for kindness before capacity, say the elders when a boulder wants wider nets in haste. Let attention be your engine, they add, and the apprentice learns that a village's cool is made of hundreds of small courtesies, a mat lifted for a neighbor's breeze, a chalk mark on a jug for a stranger's cup, a bell retuned for a street you seldom walk. There are exams, though they look like festivals. On the long breath day, everyone rests the usual help. The windcatcher's drip is stilled, the plaza fountain sleeps, and the apprentices are asked to keep a room comfortable with nothing but shutters, mats, and the grammar of doors. They pace, listen, adjust, wait. At noon, elders step inside and sit in silence. A louver is tipped a hair. A door is given 2 fingers more. The air goes from tolerable to kind. Past, says a grandmother who has not praised publicly in a decade, and the apprentice can feel the praise settle like cool on the back of their neck. On the ridge, the final test is a morning alone. A single line of panels is left to the apprentice at moonset. The sea is quiet. The sky is a rumor of pearl. They walk the posts, tap the feet, angle the corners a breath, wet the heart of a drip thread, roughen a mirror patch with a whisper of sand. They kneel, press a palm to runnel stone, and feel the skin temperature that means ready. And then they do nothing showy. They wait. Fog arrives like a shy guest. Beads gather. A first drop chooses the trench. The sacrificial bowl swallows politely. The apprentice touches the ledger with clean hands and writes 2 words, the elders' favorites. We listened. Mistakes will still come. A bell will sulk because someone set a screen too clever by half. A jar will pale because a wall stole its night cool. A knot will tell the truth at the worst time. Apprentices learn the art of apology that repairs. Chalk on the jug, a neighbor's reed mat lifted, a note in the margin that reads, next time, 1 finger. Pride moves like heat. Humility moves like shade. Elders dwell in shade. They keep memory without making it heavy. They show the page from 20 years ago when the same street corner argued with the same wind, and they laugh the way drought laughs on its first forgiving morning. And then one dawn, the names trade places. The apprentice becomes the person with a palm that can read stone, with a wrist that can hear rope, with eyes that see a draft's curve without feathers. A new apprentice stands with a strip of mesh across their hand and says, I can't count the roughness. Good, says the not-so-old keeper now,
because that's how you'll know not to send it smooth. They tie the first bowline together. The wind, amused, lifts a curl of hair at the child's temple. The bell in the doorway, tuned right, does not complain.